Hey everybody, welcome to Marvel Champions Monthly, a fan podcast about the card game Marvel Champions. Uh, However, today we have a special episode for you. We have with us today Brian from Restoration Games to talk all about the unmatched sets that they can for the Marvel unmatched sets. So I have with me Kennedy Hawk. How are you doing, Kennedy Hawk?
Really good. Really good. Excited.
Yeah. And Brian, thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Absolutely. Always excited to come and talk.
So, we've done this before with other like Marvel adjacent Marvel games that aren't Marvel Champions. We're always excited to do this because we are big fans of the Marvel Universe, Marvel Universes, I guess we should say, and comic books in general, superheroes, all that kind of good stuff. So, before we get into that, though, Brian, let's get to know you a little bit. Our listeners can get to know you. Why don't you tell us how you got into the hobby? You know, your story that way.
Sure. So like my entrance into hobby gaming and my entrance into comics happened like 20 years apart. I've been reading comics since I have basically been old enough to read. I started with X-Men and then sort of branched out to the rest of the Marvel universe. And then when I was a teenager, I got some into DC and then into Dark Horse and Image. And when I was in college, I tried to be a hipster and read comics that nobody else read, right? But I didn't really even get into hobby gaming until about 10 years ago. I played Magic and Dungeons and Dragons and all of that sort of stuff, but that was sort of where gaming ended for me until I played Betrayal at House on the Hill. And I was like, oh, these games can do so much more than, what Magic and these other things can do. So I started just eating absolutely everything. And then about 3 years after that, I started designing my own games. And then 6 years ago, I decided, hey, I'm going to be a full-time freelancer working in board games. And then 3 years ago, got picked up at Restoration and have been working with them ever since.
That's awesome. So what specifically, or what's your day-to-day role over at Restoration Games?
So my title at Restoration is I'm the in-house time traveler. Restoration Games, for those who are unaware, takes games from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, sort of retinkers their mechanics and slaps a fresh coat of paint on them, and then sort of releases our versions of it. So we get to take all of these really cool ideas that happened, 20, 30, 40 years ago, and sort of see what they would look like with today's design sensibilities. Which sort of unfortunately for me means that I'm almost exclusively working on games that came out before I was born. So it's really weird to sort of have to go and find a game from like 1981, or 1975 or whatever, and then pick up and sort of play it and say like, okay, what's good about this game? How do we make it better? How do we take the things that we know now and make this game the thing that everybody remembered, but better.
So you get to go back in time every day?
Yep, every single day.
It's pretty awesome. I remember I was first explaining the concept of Restoration Games to my wife, and she likes this store, Restoration Furniture. And she said, oh, it's like that store I like, but for things you care about. And I was like, yes, exactly. Precisely what I should have said in the first place. So yeah, it's awesome.
Well, that's awesome. So, so who you've been reading comics for a long time. Who's your favorite Marvel hero?
My favorite Marvel hero, probably Colossus. I do love a Colossus. I grew up reading X-Men, and I also at the laundromat where my parents used to do their laundry, there was one of the old X-Men with the big honkin' X-Men 6-player arcade machines. So I got to spend a lot of time doing, playing as Colossus in the X-Men arcade game. And that's sort of followed me as I've grown up. I've, followed Colossus off and on for 20, 25 years now.
What's your favorite Colossus arc? Are you like a fan of the Whedon arc or the Legacy Virus injection?
The Legacy Virus is sort of like it's hokey in the way that I love comics to be hokey. Where it's just like, yeah, and then there's a virus from outer space that comes down, and oh no, it's going to infect everyone unless I sacrifice myself. And it's not really as much about the story as it is about like Colossus being cool and noble and all of that sort of stuff. So yeah, the Legacy Virus arc is very good.
So do you remember what your first X-Men comic book was?
Oh boy. I want to say, oh man, I'm thinking about it, but I don't know that I do. I just sort of remember that the X-Men was sort of ubiquitously part of my life. Because I think like a lot of people who grew up in the 90s started on the X-Men cartoon.
Yep.
And then just started picking up comics after that as soon as I had run through all of the cartoon, because there's so much of it, right? And I loved reading as a kid, still love reading, so it's nice to just have something to be able to dig in and just tear through. So I don't know, I don't even know that I started in chronological order. I think it was just like picking up whatever X-Men comic I could find. I remember the first like big arc that I read was Days of Future Past.
Yeah, good one.
Yeah. And so Days of Future Past was the first one that I like picked up intentionally and was like, okay, this is the one that I'm going to read from start to finish.
Awesome. And we don't have mutants in the MCU yet. So what's your favorite MCU movie or show? I guess there's shows now, right? So
Yeah, there are shows. My favorite MCU movie is probably Captain America: Civil War. Captain America: Civil War. It's a spy flick, but with superheroes, which is sort of right up my alley. I love a James Bond, and so like seeing a James Bond, or I'm sorry, the Winter Soldier is the one that I'm thinking of. Uh, sort of seeing a James Bond flick, but starring Captain America, it's just super cool.
yeah, I could watch several of those.
Yeah.
A good choice. I like it. All right, so getting back to Unmatched, and you talked about your role at Restoration Games and taking these, I'll call them old games, or maybe outdated is a better term.
Sure.
And
Classics.
a classic game, and giving it not just a facelift, but like a retuning, right?
Yep.
Um, for those of our listeners that don't know, what was the game that Unmatched is based off of?
So Unmatched is based on a game that came out in the late 90s, early 2000s called Star Wars Epic Duels. And one of the founders of Restoration Games, Rob Davio, worked on Star Wars Epic Duels when he was at Hasbro. And so, he had this love of the sort of Epic Duels system, and the idea of it. So he decided that we were sort of going to break our rule of 70s, 80s, and 90s and sort of pull one out from a little bit later, give it a retune, and sort of see what we could do with it.
So the Unmatched system, I mean, it's a system, right? We can call it a system because not all the products, but any product that has more than, at least so far, that has more than two or more than one deck in it is a standalone expansion. Is that kind of how you market it or how you call it?
Yeah, I mean, we do a lot of stuff to make sure that someone who doesn't know what Unmatched is and sees a box of Unmatched on their shelf can pick it up and have a good time, even if they don't ever buy another box.
Yeah. So the pitch that I always give, or at least when I've given it a few times. I've gotten some friends in it and that have bought everything, even though I have everything. They're like, yeah, I want to get it too. Was you can pit the Raptors against Sherlock Holmes.
Yep.
And they're like, wait, what? So it's just, I mean, it's just one of those things that you kind of, as a kid, maybe it was just me, but as a kid, you kind of choose these favorite characters that are in completely different universes and existences, and you just pit them against each other, or it, and it just makes sense, and it just works. It
Yeah.
works.
It's always we've had the second Jurassic Park set sort of on the books for a very long time, but both because of the shipping crisis and sort of a bunch of unrelated factors, it's like just now coming out, but it has the T-Rex in it. And so my favorite thing to say to people is like, who do you think wins in a fight, Bruce Lee or a T-Rex?
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of those dawn of the internet message boards where people
Yeah.
were arguing who would win, Captain America or Superman, or
Yep.
yeah, it's real fun.
So now we're getting some actual superheroes in the game, so we can pit those superheroes, and I guess villains too,
Mhm.
against upcoming the T-Rex, or the Invisible Man, things like that. So
Well, before we get too far, not everybody that listens to our show probably knows what Unmatched or Star Wars Epic Duels was. So if you went into a game store and there was somebody sitting at a table waiting to play a game, what would you tell them in 2 minutes to summarize Unmatched and convince them to play it? How would you describe the game?
Sure. And so the way that we describe Unmatched is it's a 2-player skirmish game, 2 to 4 player skirmish game, where you choose your favorite character from movies, literature, books, that sort of stuff, and you can pit them against my favorite character. So, like you said, a really big hook of it is, hey, Sherlock Holmes can fight the raptors from Jurassic Park. You have a 30-card deck. You shuffle up your deck, you draw a hand of 5 cards, and you start playing. The system itself is relatively simple. You get 2 actions on your turn. You can either maneuver or play a card, and some of those cards are attacks, and you're trying to reduce your opponent down to 0 life. It's very quick, super breezy. Usually takes about 20-30 minutes, although we have some people who are sort of dedicated into really, really high level tournament play, and their matches can take like an hour. But usually for a person who's just starting out, it takes about 20 minutes. Great filler game. That's Unmatched.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I
Go for it.
I think that's a perfect. I was trying to think of and that's how I mean, that's what it is. That's what Unmatched, and I play a lot of. I try and play. I have a lot of skirmish games that I like to play, but Unmatched is right up there at the top. And I know Kennedy Hawk, your wife loves it, right?
Yeah, it's the game when we pick a game to play at the end of the night after we get the kids in bed. It's the one she always picks. So
Yeah,
every
but
time I see a new set, I can justify buying it and not worry about anything.
yeah, I'm like, hey, I want to play a game where we can't sit on the couch and play it. My wife's like, okay, well, Unmatched then, and I'm like, all right, sweet, that works for me.
Who's your favorite character? Who do y'all play?
Go for it,
I
Dan.
have a thing for people with bows and arrows. So my favorite character is Robin Hood.
Yeah.
I know he's not top tier or anything, but I just enjoy playing him. So
He's still really good though. I mean,
I think he's great.
um, Robin Hood's one of my favorites. Do you have? Here's my question. So some of the characters have sidekicks, which is, I mean, can add to the complexity, but not necessarily a lot. Do you feel like you're able to use the sidekicks for Robin Hood like very well, or do you kind of just do they kind of just sit there? Because there's a lot of um,
I think you
tactical
can use him
decisions
pretty well for
with
like body
maneuvering.
blocking and stuff like
Yeah,
that, right? You can't move through opposing characters, so you've got I think it's 3 merry men, right, to maneuver around and get in the way.
and yep.
And
Can recall.
they can sort of just like be meat shields in front of you and take a hit or two.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I would have to say mine is Beowulf,
Oh, love Beowulf.
because that rage mechanic, he gets a few tokens, and every time he gets hit, he gains a rage, and you can use rage to, you know, add to his attacks or do other things. And that for me, it's like an additional, or it's like a currency that adds another layer to the game that I really find enjoyable.
Cool. I have a character for you in the Marvel set that we can talk about a little later.
Ooh, let's do it. I'm excited. Okay, so let's see. Where are we at, Dan?
Who's your favorite character so
Oh,
far?
yeah, there
Of
you
the
go.
ones that have been released.
My girl Little Red is always going to hold a super special place in my heart because she was the first deck that I sort of got to go off on my own and do. I wasn't around at Restoration for Battle of Legends Volume 1 or Robin Hood versus Bigfoot. So those are almost entirely, Rob and Justin setting the rules of the system and sort of doing all of that sort of stuff. I came in right at the tail end of Cobble and Fog, which is the third set, and I got to do some work there. But Little Red Riding Hood versus Beowulf was the first set that I got to see through from the start to finish. Myself and my design partner Noah sort of run Unmatched now, because it's definitely our type of game, and that was sort of our entry point. And so I think Little Red is always going to be. I'm always going to have a soft spot for my first baby, and I sort of Little Red is the perfect character for me. She flows, she cares about what's in her hand and what's in her discard, and she sort of, when you get into the groove, she just chugs right along and she's absolutely unstoppable. And that's my favorite character to play.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned it there. Just like in Marvel Champions, one of my favorite things is each character has a hook. So what would you say the big hook or thing to pull you in with Little Red is?
So the big hook is we talk about a lot of these characters as though we're talking about fighting games, because another thing that Noah and I sort of refer to a lot whenever we're designing these decks is like Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat or things like that, and how do these characters feel? And Little Red is sort of what we call a flow character, where she has her cards care about the top card of her discard pile, and basically all of the cards have a symbol on them, either a basket, a knife, or a wolf pelt. And when they go to your discard pile, they might trigger cards that are in your hand. And so, like, the thing that you have to do when you're playing Little Red is you sort of plan a couple of turns ahead so that you can say, okay, this card will be in my discard pile, and that'll make Never Leave the Path more powerful when I play it. And then that goes into my discard pile. And so the next card I'm going to play is What Big Eyes You Have, which triggers off of the other card. And so you sort of get into this flow. And that's her hook. That's her type of character.
So there's it's like a mini programming game with your hand and your discard pile, right? I mean,
yeah.
I've played her and I've been demolished while I'm playing her. I played as her. I mean, anyway, my wife's really good at this game. Let's just put it that way. It just clicks for her, and she just can. It doesn't matter who the characters are. She will just wallop me. So it's okay because I love it so much that I enjoy a good beatdown. So in respect to Little Red's deck, is there anything that sticks out to you from maybe when you were developing it, designing it, any cards that you were like, this has to be in it, or and almost like, because you're saying this is your baby, this is your firstborn, right? Kind of. Was there anything like that with specific cards in her deck that you feel that way about them?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that I sort of like to sneakily do in my decks is, whenever I'm designing decks, is I like to put little stories in, and I think it's fun for players to sort of discover those things organically. And so for Little Red, and we can talk about it. We also did it with some of the Marvel characters. For Little Red, we did What Big Eyes You Have, What Big Ears You Have. And those are two cards that are in her deck, and if you use them together back to back, you get this really big combo where you cancel the effects of your opponent's card, you ignore its value, and then you deal them 3 damage. So if you can pull that off right in a row, you get to tell this cool little story, and also, those cards are sort of related because of their names. So I love doing that sort of stuff in decks, and Justin, sort of our lore master at Restoration, does a really good job of coming up with ways to connect cards in that way. Noah and I are very much mechanics people, where we sort of sit down and we work out the mechanics, and then Justin comes in and he goes, "These are all really cool card names, and I've read Grimm's Fairy Tale 1,000 times, and so I know exactly what these cards need to be named." So it's super cool to sort of work in that team, and have everybody sort of contribute in a way that makes in a way that like makes the decks cohere in a way that they otherwise wouldn't.
That reminds me a lot of one of the characters in Marvel Champions. It's Gamora, and I think you'd really like playing her. She has some cards that go well together. That if you play back to back, you get bonuses, and you can take care of the villain's schemes that he's got going on over here, but then also deal damage to him at the same time. Anyway, it reminds me a lot of those two cards you just said.
Cool.
Okay, so you at Restoration Games, you guys do a lot of IPs. Do you even for Unmatched, do you and Noah have like a bucket list?
Yeah.
Don't divulge anything that you can't, right? But you've got to have something that you're like, yeah, this is what we want to pull from. Let's get the go ahead on this. Let's try and make this happen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so if you would have asked me this question, 2.5, 3 years ago, we would have said Marvel. I specifically would have said Marvel, right? And it's absolutely been a dream come true working with Marvel. They've been super excellent. They gave us a lot of creative leeway to sort of do the things that we do, both mechanically and artistically. The art and the sets are incredible. We got to deal with our own artists and choose people that we like and do stuff like that. And Marvel was super supportive. And I think that like you sort of go in expecting Marvel to be this huge big corporation who's like, oh no, it's our way or the highway. But really, like they were like, hey, you know what you're doing, you're the experts, go ahead and do the thing you want to do. Just show it to us at the end. And we showed it to them, and they had some reasonable notes to take, like, oh, this is not the way that Ghost Rider is supposed to look, so we need to change this. Or like the Winter Soldier uses this type of weapon and not this type of weapon, so like how can we make that feel better? And so we got a lot of really cool insights going through the process and being like, talking to Marvel directly, hey, how should these characters feel? What should they do? That sort of stuff. And they, like I said, they were super, super supportive.
That sounds like a lot of fun. So can you, and obviously only say what you can, but like,
Sure.
Can you walk us through the process of, you had it as like a bucket list. Well, it would have been 2 or 3 years ago, maybe when you started or before you started, we want to do Marvel. How does that like actually even come to happen? How did that happen for Restoration Games?
So at the time, we were partnering with a company called Mondo Games, who has a lot of sort of inroads with that with big license holders, because their parent company is Alamo Drafthouse. And so they actually had a person whose job it is to sort of use their contacts and go in and connect with IP holders and that sort of stuff, and say like, hey, Unmatched is a system, we think it fits your brand really well. It's sort of like the 2-player skirmish thing. And companies, I think, are surprisingly receptive to that sort of stuff, especially now, right? When you have Avatar: The Last Airbender doing $4.5 million on Kickstarter or whatever. I think more than that, it was almost $9 million. Like, just a crazy amount of money on Kickstarter, right? And Marvel Champions doing so well, and like Crisis Protocol and all of those games that are designed by all of these really, really talented hobby designers. And I think like those people have really paved the way for this sort of renaissance of comic book games and hobby sort of dipping their toes into all of these really weird licenses that wouldn't have really happened 10 or 15 years ago, at least not in a serious way. I think when you look at the sort of licensed branded games that you had from the mid 2000s to even the 90s, you ended up with things that were like, oh, Marvel Monopoly and reskins and all of this other stuff. But now it's getting to the point where you can sort of go and say like, hey, we have this thing, we think it fits your brand, we think that it would integrate really well, we want to do something that is bespoke for you, and we want to make sure that, you know, we put our best foot forward, and you know, people who like Unmatched will become more attached to Marvel, and people who like Marvel can come in and sort of see what Unmatched is, you know. And so honestly, it's way easier, I think, now than it would have been 10 or 15 years ago, to just go and talk to someone, you know, and reach out and say like, hey, we have this fantastically successful, you know, minis game. Can we do something for you? Can we work together? You know?
That's awesome. It'd be so fun to be a fly on the wall and see that pitch to them. Like, hey, you can actually have Deadpool fight. I don't know if you could do this, but I mean, you can in the game. Deadpool fight the Raptors. Anyway, because Deadpool came out as a standalone character. I guess would it be about a year ago now?
Almost a year ago, yeah.
Um,
Deadpool was sort of a weird one, because we had already started working on the rest of these Marvel sets. And you know, because of shipping and sort of all sorts of other things, these sets ended up getting pushed back. Originally, these sets were supposed to come out at the end of 2020, beginning of 2021, I want to say. So these got pushed back quite a bit. But we ended up having this really weird thing where, you know, Marvel was like, oh, hey, we've got this April Fool's Day thing coming out. Do you think you can have a deck ready for us in 3 weeks? And we were like, oh heck. we have 3 weeks to design this deck. You know, and Jason, one of our art directors, was like, no, Deadpool's absolutely my favorite. Here's how we're going to do this. We're going to lean into him being wacky and weird. We're going to make a deck that breaks all the rules, you know, not take itself too seriously, all of that sort of stuff. You know, and we jumped on board, and we sort of shoved ourselves into the writer's room and collaborated for, you know, a couple of 6-hour days, and ended up with this really just bonkers deck. You know, and then we like did a bunch of quick play testing with it, and then, you know, we were like, okay, it's balanced, it's fun, that's the thing that we want to do. And then Jason went through and he took like old Marvel art and old Unmatched art and like Photoshop Deadpool into it and all of this other stuff, and it came together to be this really charming thing that like really feels like Deadpool.
yeah, definitely does. Yeah. Anyway, so that's a really cool story. So I guess let's just dive into the Marvel sets.
Sure.
And so we have standalone Deadpool currently released, and now earlier this week we have Redemption Row that just came out, right?
Mhm.
Redemption Row, and in Redemption Row, who do we have?
We have Ghost Rider, Luke Cage, and Moon Knight.
Okay. And let's just overview so then coming out soon, and I think should have been ideally the same time as Redemption Row, was Hell's Kitchen. Is that right?
Yep. That ended up getting delayed by about a week. So hopefully, like by the time this comes out, it will be in the process of shipping. But we're hoping like the end of March is when that stuff will sort of start rolling.
Okay. And in Hell's Kitchen we have who are the characters?
Daredevil, Elektra, and Bullseye.
Okay, so we have a villain in there.
Yep.
Which is, I mean, if you're not familiar in Marvel Champions, unless they create a villain that's also a hero, you can't play as the villain. So that's something that's kind of fun, to get to play as the villain.
Yeah, you know, whenever we were sort of setting these things out, we wanted to make sure that we got at least one cool villain into here, so that, you know, you could sort of play out a story, you know, revolving around a villain, and you know, do some like Marvel giant sized team ups.
Yep. Okay. So then there's two more after that, correct? And can we talk about the names of those and the characters that are in them?
Yeah, for sure.
Or like at least name the characters?
Yes, for sure. So at the end of later towards the end of the year, we are coming out with 2 more Marvel boxes. The first one is Teen Spirit, and it has Squirrel Girl, Miss Marvel, and Cloak and Dagger. And then shortly after that, we have King and Country, which is Black Widow, Black Panther, and the Winter Soldier.
Okay, right on. So we have a subset of listeners that love Miss Marvel. She's a playable character in Marvel Champions, and we always get pinged that we need to give Miss Marvel some more love. So, maybe when that one comes out, we'll do a playthrough or something. Dan.
Absolutely.
Can't wait to play Miss Marvel and Unmatched. Don't worry.
I love Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel is I think overall, out of all 3 of these Marvel sets, I do love I do love some Ghost Rider. I do love some Luke Cage, but man, Teen Spirit has just got like something came together for Teen Spirit when it was just like these 3 characters. They all turned out great. We like had this really strong idea for them all at the beginning. They went through almost no changes throughout playtesting. Like we nailed it on the first shot, which never happens. Almost never happens. We usually go through a bunch of different cycles and change a bunch of things. But all of these characters were just like they had such a strong character and like such a strong like mechanical hook to them that they just sort of breezed right on through, and like we had to like tweak numbers, and that it was absolute joy to work on them.
So you're saying that I mean obviously Miss Marvel, Squirrel Girl, Cloak and Dagger, those like went through very, very little changes from their initial like inception of.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That shows me that you're like, these are characters that we really want, and we have an idea of what we want, and let's make it happen. That shows that you actually really enjoy those characters, I think.
Yeah, and I do. I mean, Cloak and Dagger, I think, is my favorite. No offense to Miss Marvel, but Cloak and Dagger, I think, are my favorites out of Teen Spirit. But Miss Marvel is pretty close.
Can you take us through the design process for a character? Do you start with like a mechanical hook for the character or a thematic hook? And someone asked us if we could ask this. You can deny if you'd like to. Sure. Have you ever had a character where you had a mechanical hook for them and it just didn't work out, and you either tried to redo the whole character or you decided, hey, this hook would work for someone else in a later box?
Moon Knight was actually kind of like that. Moon Knight was a tough nut to crack for sure. We went through 7 or 8 different iterations of Moon Knight before we settled on the one that we ended up putting in the box, and he went through a bunch of crazy stuff. So Moon Knight is one of the ones in Redemption Row, so I'm happy to talk about it if y'all want to. But Moon Knight has 3 different identities. And basically every turn he cycles to a new identity, and his identities have different powers. He can either be Moon Knight, where he's sort of bouncing around and doing, the sort of acrobatic shtick. He can be Mr. Knight, when he's sort of more defensive and sort of feeling the opponent out and getting information. And then he can turn into Khonshu, who is sort of the powerhouse. He gets a bonus on his attacks. He can't take damage from effects. And you get to have this really big power moment where you sort of turn into this Egyptian god and just wail on your opponent. And Moon Knight was difficult because the Moon Knight, I think both in the comics and in like the games that he's in, it's really hard to focus on what it is that he does, because like there's so much to that character and it's so deep, where he has a bunch of different identities, and so you can sort of play that up. And then he also has powers that are granted to him by Egyptian gods, and so you can sort of play that up. And so we went through a bunch of different iterations where, at one point he was 3 different figures that all shared a health pool. And that turned out to not work out super well. And then, at one point he had like 5 different identities that he cycled through, and that was too much and people couldn't keep track of it. So we ended up having to go through a bunch of different iterations of just like, let's take away all of the parts that people don't like and then figure out what people like about Moon Knight, and we ended up in sort of this thing where you would cycle between these three identities, and the sort of hook for him is you can play all of your cards are at any time, but some cards are better when you are Moon Knight, and some cards are better when you're Khonshu. And so, you have this really cool puzzle of how am I going to craft my hand to sort of maximize my big turn, and how am I going to survive in between my big turns.
So I saw a card for Moon Knight that lets him, after a combat, switch to the next identity. So that would I think it's called I'm Not Real.
Yeah.
Is that right? Does that let you? So you're able to go through the identities quicker that way. Is that right?
Yeah,
That's the idea?
And
To get to the one you need.
Yeah, and it sort of makes you a little less predictable too, right? So you can, your opponent knows 2 turns from now that you're going to be Khonshu, so they can sort of back up and get ready, and then you can play I'm Not Real, and then oops, you're Khonshu next turn.
Gotcha.
And you get to sort of break up their flow a little bit.
Okay, that's cool that it's not just a passive thing, but he has some ways to kind of speed things up if he needs to.
Yeah.
All right. So I will ask this question because I did see that there was some some design changes to Redemption Row and Hell's Kitchen, like some slight design graphic design changes.
Yep.
From when they were first announced to the final product. Is that right?
Yeah.
Like just some coloration, it looks like, that type of thing. But I did notice in Hell's Kitchen there was one additional card, or one card taken out. Let's see.
Hell's Kitchen has some let's say that we play with some deck sizes in there.
Okay.
Normally an unmatched deck is 30 cards. And that's really important because it limits the amount of time that a game can be. Because basically you have to draw cards every turn, and if you can't draw cards from your deck, you start taking damage. And so one of the things that we played around with in Hell's Kitchen is, what if it's not a 30 card deck? What if it's a 15 card deck twice? Or what if it's a smaller deck that you get bonuses for how small your deck is, and that sort of stuff. And we got to play around with some really cool things that really, I think, sort of fit in with those characters. So it's we got to do some neat stuff there, and I don't want to spoil too much, but we ended up in a pretty cool place with a lot of the Hell's Kitchen characters regarding how competitive players play the game. Because competitive players like sort of maximizing all of their cards and going through their entire 30 card deck. And the Hell's Kitchen characters really sort of turn that on its head. So I'm really excited to see what people think about that.
Interesting. So aside from Hell's Kitchen with the 30 card decks, does that help you and Noah with designing the characters? Because you have these, I mean, they're not technically constraints because you changed it up with Hell's Kitchen, but
Right.
I imagine that helps with knowing the amount of cards you're going to do, so you not have to fill this deck, but it gives you an idea of what you need in order to make this character feel like that actual character.
Yeah, I mean, we have we have a thing. Noah has a spreadsheet that's sort of in our Unmatched Master document, and it's just called Joe Fighter. And Joe Fighter is just sort of our run-of-the-mill regular fighter, and he's the person that we run numbers against. And so a lot of our process is sort of starting with Joe Fighter, who has all of the basic things that a regular unmatched fighter would need. He has feints that cancel your opponent's card and let you sort of interact in that way, and then he has skirmishes that let you move before and after combat, so you can sort of get in and get out if you need to. And he has attacks that are 5 and attacks that are 1, and sort of so he can have high moments and low moments. And so we use that as sort of a template for when we're designing characters, because we know what an unmatched character should feel like. And then the design challenge is, how do we make a character who feels good and unmatched that also feels like Daredevil or Elektra or whoever. And that's sort of when we start breaking the rules. So like in Hell's Kitchen, when we can start playing around with deck sizes, we do stuff like that. In Redemption Row, we played around with what happens if you have more than one character card? What does that look like? And that turned into Moon Knight. what happens if you block damage automatically? That's Luke Cage. Luke Cage has bulletproof skin, and that's sort of his thing. And so like we sort of start at the very high level and we say what about this character makes them cool. And for Ghost Rider, it's that he's this flaming demon and he can harness hell to power his attacks. And for Luke Cage, it's, hey, he's got bulletproof skin and he's invulnerable. And then for Moon Knight, it's he has these identities and he's powered by an Egyptian god. And so we get to take that at a very high level and then say, what does this look like in Unmatched? And for Luke Cage, it's he just takes 2 less damage from everything. You have to sort of get at him sneaky, otherwise he's just going to absorb all of your attacks. And that sort of stuff I think is an interesting design challenge every time we come up against it.
Yeah, that's really cool, and I'm interested to know, like, I mean, you mentioned previously that Marvel was a really good partner to work with, and I'm curious how you just decided on these. We went through the characters. There's 13 characters now that
Yep.
will be released in Marvel. I'm curious how you came to these characters, right? Because you talked about, you get this overview of, all right, Ghost Rider uses the power from hell to just take out opponents. Is that something that you and Noah or somebody else at Restoration, or you guys all come together and you're like, these are the characters I would love to see in this game now that we were working with Marvel? Or how does that work? Like, how did you come up with these characters specifically?
So this is actually, we call it the list in our sort of internal design meetings, because Marvel sent us a giant list of characters. When we said, hey, we want to do some Unmatched, we gave them like a proof of concept deck for it ended up turning into Daredevil. And they were like, okay, this sounds great. We would love to work with you. Here is a list of 500 characters that you could use if you wanted to. And we were like, well, we want to do like 12. So let's start paring down this list.
Okay.
And so, we have just like this document that is this huge list that we're control effing through to be like, well, what characters do we like? Who are our favorites? That sort of stuff. Who do we think, that our audience will know? How do we make this a round, interesting box? How do we, do all of that sort of stuff? And we have a lot of criteria when we're picking characters for a normal box, and we applied a lot of that here, right? Like, we want to make sure that we have like a diverse cast of characters, and we want to make sure that they make sense fighting each other inside of a box, right? And we want to make sure that they all have sort of the same power level, so it makes sense that they would be fighting each other, right? And sort of that, we went through a lot of that same process with the Marvel characters, and we just had that additional constraint of it has to be on this 500 item list.
Okay.
And the bummer part about that list was we couldn't use mutants at the time, which is why you don't see a Colossus and why you don't see a Professor X or Wolverine or any of those characters, is because we had to sort of stay away from mutants at the time. And so we ended up starting with Hell's Kitchen and Redemption Row, and they were originally one box. It was originally, we were going to do a 4-pack. And then we decided, well, we have too many good ideas. Let's split this off into 2 3-packs. Because we want to do all of this stuff. And so originally it was Elektra. Originally our list was Elektra, Ghost Rider, Blade, and I forget who the 4th character was, but we were going to do like a Midnight Suns pack. And we ended up sort of going a different direction because we had a really good idea for Elektra, and we were like, well, what about Bullseye? And then we had a really good idea for Bullseye, and we were like, well, if we have these two, we have to have Daredevil. And so Daredevil sort of went in that box, and that's how Hell's Kitchen sort of came about. And then we had Ghost Rider sort of hanging out on his own after that, but we had already drafted this Ghost Rider deck, and it already worked and functioned. And so we were like, okay, well, who would we pair with Ghost Rider? And we came up with people who at one point or another were heroes that had been in prison. And so we ended up with Ghost Rider imprisoned in hell, Luke Cage imprisoned in the raft, and then Moon Knight, who was sort of imprisoned in his own mind.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, so for our audience that doesn't know, one of the things that obviously this is a skirmish game. The boxes each come with a map to play on.
Oh yeah, I forgot we haven't even talked about maps.
we haven't talked about maps. That's not a thing that happens in Marvel Champions, but that's a thing that definitely happens in Unmatched. And these boxes have one map, correct?
Yeah, so they have one map each. The front side is has a graphic design treatment on it that's really, really easy to read. It has solid colors and patterns, and it's good for colorblind folks like myself. And then the back side is sort of a more artistic treatment where the colors aren't all the way filled in, and you really get to see the art.
So with Redemption Row, the map is the raft. Is that right?
Yep.
Is that something that when you guys came up with Redemption Row, you're like, all right, we know this map's going to be the raft? Is that like?
Yeah, that's sort of how it went. Is because we had this sort of prison theme going on, and we were like, well, there's one famous prison in Marvel, and it's the raft, so we got to do it. And it ended up like that map came together really, really well, because we had the idea of like, we can have this sort of like prison yard brawl going on, and so we had like a place on the raft where it's the cafeteria, and you can like beat each other up over lunch trays, and then we have the holding cells, and then we have the docks to get onto the raft. And so those are the three main areas of the raft map where you can sort of plan your movement around.
All right, that's cool. What's the map for Hell's Kitchen? Is it Hell's Kitchen, I'm assuming?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
it is the area in front of Fisk Tower.
Okay. And I'm curious, was Fisk one of the characters that you guys considered?
We almost did a Kingpin.
Okay.
Kingpin was sort of it was between him and Bullseye, for that pack, and we ended up doing Bullseye because he just had a much better mechanical hook than Kingpin did. Kingpin's really interesting, but he does a lot of stuff from the shadows. And when it comes to like straight up brawling, he is a formidable opponent, but he's just sort of a big tanky dude who can sort of throw hits and get hit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really cool story, but the sort of thing that you want Kingpin to do is sort of be in the background scheming, right?
Yeah.
And so Bullseye is much more of a like, he's gonna meet you on the field of battle and he's gonna fight you, even if he doesn't quite do it face to face.
Interesting. Okay. And I would like to come back to the maps, but before we get too far away from these characters,
Sure.
Is there anything besides X-Men from the list that you wish you would have been able to get into one of these upcoming sets? Any characters?
I do miss Blade. I think Blade was super cool, and I'm sad that we had to let him go. We had such a cool idea for him as like a vampire hunter and like being a person who was a tracker and all of this other sort of stuff. I'm confident that some of his mechanics are going to make it into other characters, because I think that we have a lot of good places for those to end up. But
That's good to hear that you don't have to just scrap them completely.
Yeah. But boy, the day that we made that decision, my heart broke a little bit, because I do love Blade.
Okay, so I'm guessing, because I've seen the character cards, because I mentioned earlier that I like to main Beowulf.
Yep.
Because of his rage tokens. I'm guessing that you're gonna say I should go straight for Ghost Rider.
Yep, you should
because of his Hellfire.
Yeah. So Ghost Rider's mechanic is that he's got a Hellfire dial, and you sort of charge his Hellfire in order to do these really big attacks, right? And so whenever you move, you can spend a Hellfire to jump on your motorcycle and run people down. And that was sort of where he started, was like, oh, it's Ghost Rider, but it's definitely Ghost Rider on a motorcycle. That's amazingly cool. So
And the
you can
sculpt, the mini is really cool too. I think that's
besides
done.
the T-Rex, I think it's the biggest mini that we have. And it's him, he's got fire and a chain and he's riding his motorcycle around. It's just it's absolute power fantasy, being able to jump on a motorcycle and like run over all of Robin Hood's merry men.
Painful.
All right, Dan. I think we have our next matchup when we meet up. I'm gonna be Ghost Rider and you can be Robin Hood. Okay.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah, and Ghost Rider's thing is like when he has Hellfire, he's super, super powerful. He can, penance stare people and drag people around on his motorcycle and all of that sort of stuff. But then when he loses Hellfire, he slowly transforms back into his human form, and he's a little bit weaker, and you have to like do a little bit of work to sort of psych him back up to be Ghost Rider again. And that was sort of his hook when we started working on him, was Ghost Rider is sort of this unbeatable immortal demon. The way that you beat Ghost Rider is you beat up Johnny Blaze, right? So that was sort of what we were working with whenever we started doing Ghost Rider.
So
You have to do like a lot of comic research on the characters when you were coming up with these, or did you know most of these characters just from your comic reading to get a good enough idea for a mechanic and theme and stuff?
I had to read a lot of Moon Knight, and I had to read a decent amount of Daredevil. Those were the two that I was, I think, most unfamiliar with. I'd read a decent amount of both of those runs, but like nothing that was recent. Like the last Moon Knight comic that I had read was like in the early 2000s or whatever. So I went and I picked up, the Avengers run that Moon Knight was in, and read through all of that. And then actually after this came out, someone was like, oh, there's this standalone Moon Knight that you have to read. And I read it and it was great. But that's the one that I think is still going currently. And I would need to look up who the writer is on that.
So I'll tell you, my favorite Marvel hero is Daredevil. So I'm really excited to see him, that I can actually play as him, because I don't play Crisis Protocol, and Daredevil is not a character in Marvel Champions yet. Maybe in the next 5 years or so, we'll see. But I'm super excited to be able to have Daredevil, and play as him. Anyway.
Well, we're happy to give you your Daredevil fix.
Yes.
So where can people order this box from? Is this going to be in retail they can pick up at their like local game store later this month, or is it mostly coming straight from Resto to start with?
Yeah, you can pick it up at your friendly local game store starting April 20th. So that's when retailers can start getting their product in. But if you want to get it early, you can always order it direct from our website at www.restorationgames.com/store. And if you go there, you can pre-order that, or you can order Redemption Row, pre-order Hell's Kitchen, and also order any of the other Unmatched products that you would like if anything else strikes your fancy. The Redemption Row products are shipping now, so if you order it, you've ordered it, and you should get it within a week. Hell's Kitchen will start shipping out from our website at the end of this month, and then both of them will hit retail on that April 20th date.
Awesome. And then hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have Teen Spirit and For King and Country in our hands.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally.
Yep.
Is this all the Marvel that we're going to see in Unmatched?
Never say never.
Okay.
Never say never, because we are huge Marvel fans ourselves, and I think that if there was something that we were going to go back and revisit, should the opportunity arise, Marvel would be really, really high up on the list. like I said, they were a joy to work with. Absolute bucket list for us. We don't have anything in the pipeline right now, but never say never.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard some at the time mutants weren't available, so the future maybe that'll be exciting.
For the future, maybe. I'd give an arm and a leg to work on a Colossus deck, so.
All right. Well, hopefully that can happen. Okay. So last question from me about Marvel. For our fans that listen to us that maybe have never played Unmatched before, do you feel like Redemption Row and or Hell's Kitchen are good places for them to jump in to Unmatched and to get their feet wet with the system with some characters that they know?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we talked about, and we talked about it a little earlier, is we always have to take into account that any box of Unmatched might be someone's first box. And so we do pay attention to that, as far as complexity goes and rules overhead and all of that sort of stuff. And we've even more so kept it in mind with Marvel, because we expect that a lot of people are going to want to play Daredevil or Luke Cage or Ghost Rider or whatever. So Marvel is an accessible entry point. It's one of the ones that I recommend, or it's one of the ones that I will be recommending. That and basically Battle of Legends Volume 1, which was the first set that we put out. That's not to say that the characters aren't interesting and don't have a lot of interesting play patterns, because I think that it's easy to think that for simple characters they're maybe a little boring. But that's certainly not the case, because you'll get to do some real tense stuff. But yeah, I think Hell's Kitchen and I think Redemption Row are great entry points, because we have the accessibility for people who are not necessarily Unmatched fans yet. We hope that you will come and join us. But we still have all of the cool things that you can do in Unmatched, and we really want to give people who aren't necessarily Unmatched fans a chance to come in and really feel like that they're Daredevil, or really feel like that they're Elektra, and a chance to sort of be a Marvel hero. That's sort of our hope with these sets. And even if you like comic books and you don't even necessarily like hobby games, we hope that people will come in and sort of sit down and take 5 minutes to read the rules, in order to sort of play out your favorite comic book.
Awesome. Anything else, Kennedy Hawk?
No, I'm just gonna be sitting at my mailbox all week waiting. I guess next week they'll ship this week, and then I can sit in my mailbox for a week.
Yeah. So, Brian, anything else you want to add? We really appreciate your time coming on to talk to us about all things Unmatched and Marvel. But anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
No, I think keep an eye out for those Marvel sets. We've got them coming basically for the rest of the year. This is Unmatched Year of Marvel. So if you want to keep up to date with that, you can sign up for our newsletter at restorationgames.com, and that'll give you all the latest news, if you're interested in Unmatched or any of our other products. So feel free to sign up there and keep on gaming. We wouldn't be able to do this if we didn't have people who were excited about it, and so we really appreciate you being excited about this, and I really appreciate you having me on to talk about this sort of stuff, because not a lot of people really get to see how the sausage is made, so it's nice to sort of have a window to let people do that. So thank you all so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's our pleasure.
Yeah, this was fun. We can do it again when the sets come out later this year.
Absolutely, love to come back on.
All right, everybody. Thanks for stopping in. Check out restorationgames.com, correct?
Yep.
And a /store.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to go order Redemption Row or Hell's Kitchen and get to the table.